Well, I think you're right about reparations in terms of if people want it, though, what they need to do is you always need to go back to the beginning of a supply chain. Where was the beginning of the supply chain? That was in Africa. And when across the entire world, when the slavery was taking place, which was the first nation in the world that abolished slavery? The first nation in the world to abolish it. It was started by William Wilberforce, was the British. In Great Britain, they abolished slavery. 2,000 naval men died on the high seas trying to stop slavery. Why? Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them on cages waiting in the beaches. No one was running into Africa to get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages. Absolutely. That's where they should start. And maybe, I don't know, the descendants of those families where they died in the high seas trying to stop the slavery, that those families should receive something too, I think, at the same time.
It's an interesting discussion, Hillary. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We'll continue to discuss in the future.
Into Africa and get their portion of the pie, huh? You bunch of liars. When they divided Africa up, the British didn't take their nasty, red, stinking behinds into Africa and get their portion of the pie, huh? You bunch of liars. So the witch said, Britain, white folks never went into Africa. Then how they colonize Egypt, Sudan, Nigeria, and South Africa, huh? She thinks everybody's stupid, and Don Lemon is just a pawn for the white establishment. See, they don't sit down with no real men and or women that know the history. You bunch of demons.
Between 1884 and 1885, the Berlin Conference was called by German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. 14 representatives of 14 European countries attended the conference, including Britain, Belgium, France, Portugal, and Italy. Notably, no African representatives were invited. The aim was to discuss how European countries would claim colonial land in Africa and avoid war between them. Each country affirmed that they would bring civilization in the form of Christianity, and trade to each region they occupied. Although most of these African colonies were controlled by nations, the Berlin Conference allowed King Leopold II of Belgium to become the sole ruler of a vast area that is today the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The intent was to make it an area of free trade for all Europeans in Africa. However, in practice, Leopold kept out most European traders and granted concessions to various corporations to exploit the region's resources. In 1908, it was revealed that under King Leopold's instructions, native people of the Congo were forced to farm wild rubber as a form of tax payment to the colonial government. Those unable to carry out these instructions had their hand or foot severed.
European countries had been establishing colonies and building empires since the late 1400s. Imperialism brought wealth and power to Europeans. But the people living in colonies were often oppressed, abused, and in some cases, even killed.
In 40 years, Europe gobbled up virtually all of Africa south of the Sahara. It happened with tremendous speed, with tremendous brutality. The purpose of this conquest, like most conquests in history, was to make money for the conquerors, and they did so hand over fist and killed millions of people in the process.
Most Europeans thought colonization was essentially a noble undertaking. After all, they said, Europeans had strong economies, well-organized governments, and powerful armies and navies. Meanwhile, African nations were troubled by economic weakness and political divisions. The transatlantic slave trade, which did not end until the 1800s, had drastically reduced the populations of African societies. The slave trade had also contributed to intertribal warfare. European power was fueled by the technology of the Industrial Revolution. New weapons and steam-powered locomotives and ships gave Europeans the ability to move quickly and fight wars with brutal efficiency. European manufacturers wanted access to natural resources such as rubber and petroleum. African colonies could also serve as vital ports for European merchant and naval ships. European missionaries urged Africans to give up their traditional beliefs and accept Western ways and religion. Missionaries opened hospitals and schools throughout the colonies. European missionaries urged Africans to give up their traditional beliefs and accept Western ways and religion. European missionaries urged Africans to give up their traditional beliefs and accept Western ways and religion. Missionaries opened hospitals and schools throughout the colonies. Sometimes they also furthered the political and economic goals of imperialist nations. Many Europeans exploited and oppressed native Africans. Some of the worst oppression occurred in the Congo. King Leopold and other wealthy Belgians exploited the land and people of the Congo. African laborers were forced to harvest ivory and rubber. Conditions were so horrible that the populations of some areas declined drastically. Belgian exploitation of the Congo set off a scramble for colonies. Britain, France, and Germany rushed to make claims in the region.
Historically, sub-Saharan Africa has been fundamental to the global prosperity of the advanced countries. Okay? And Africa had a role to play. It has a role as a raw material producer. We will not allow sub-Saharan Africa to escape that. Okay, we do everything to keep sub-Saharan Africa where it is, also impoverished. It's absolutely vital for the prosperity of everyone else. So let's get clear about that. Okay, and this means all the economic structures, all the global institutions, and the economics we teach everyone is all designed to keep Africa exactly where it is. And whether it is Europe or US or now China, it's always the same. We need Africa to be impoverished because we need those raw materials and we need them dirt cheap. Okay, so that's the message. It doesn't mean to say that there's nothing Africans can do. Of course there is. Okay, but this is the opposition that they're fighting. This is what it's about. Because if Africa does do something different, I assure you living standards of all those in Europe and North America and Asia is going to fall. Okay? And that is a big price to pay. I assure you that the West is not going to allow that without a big fight.
I tell you.